Magick.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot, but check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on magick.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You are really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magick.me, magick.me. All right, we're recording. Good to see you. You're back.
Likewise, Jason.
Absolutely. It's good to talk to you. I want to share something with you. This is super cool.
Mm-hmm.
Just before you start, so I was impressed by your AI cut up experiment in Source Magic of working with transcription. I'm like, yeah, it does. I had vaguely had some similar unformed thoughts in that direction, and I was like, yeah, this is amazing that you've also pegged onto that. Yeah. So I wanted to share this. So related. A couple days ago, I trained an AI on the Book of the Law, and I had it write a new one.
All right.
Would you like, or at least a few passages? They're disjointed. It's kind of freaking eerie, though. Would you want to hear it?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, this is in no order. Because I kind of cut it up and cut and pasted it as well. Here we go. Know ye now reasonings too subtle for sense, all wisdom's math, either far or hid. Come, strong drunkenness of incense, bruised flesh of sacrifice. Then the die is cast, then the gods' laughters are flung abroad, then we ride on the shoulders of death. Ah, ah, death! In their throats they cry with lust and rapture, death. Feel this knife in your flanks, it pierces to divide the spine. Hold hard upon this pearl, then I am yours and you are mine. Nuit's fillet twined with gold is light on thy brows. This next one made me think of a lot of passages in your book. Mm-hmm. Let each man worship every other, whom he will, but only himself truly, however mad that worship seemeth. With truth, nevertheless, you others beware, lest any force another worshipper to abandon his own proper creed, even though that creed be false. Indeed, only error needs support from outside itself, being not until supported by pressure from without.
Well, that's the proverbial fourth chapter right there.
There you go. Right. It gets even better. Let's see. Yeah, there's some interesting wisdom coming out of this. Okay. Then it started to go a little bit off the rails. So I love this one. There are 4 gates to one. It starts with an existing passage. There are 4 gates to one palace. The floor of that palace is of silver and gold. Lapis lazuli and jasper are there, and all rare scents, jasmine and rose, and the emblems of mortality, silver vessels, golden goblets full of wine coolers, chilled with iced sherbets, flute music. Wherefore delay? Their girlfriends await thee.
Oh wow!
they warm their slim bodies at a secret fire till thou comest.
Oh wow!
It's pretty good. Let's see.
Yeah. No, it is really something in itself, and it's been given so much attention, both text-wise and also the art. Where it makes this art, and I'm a little bit undecided what I think or what my feelings are towards this. It's just I always get suspicious when things come on so strongly and so quickly. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's been brewing in the background, but when it sort of gets this kind of attention, it's usually because someone has opened the faucet in a way. And I think that it is terrifying in many ways.
Absolutely.
Because it's simply so good, it's simply so close to human expression that for most people who don't have a discerning, critical, intellectual mind, they would just accept it, right?
It's getting
this is
to
a
that
cool
level.
picture,
Yeah.
or this is a book that I can read that reminds me of something else, and it's actually just algorithmical poetry in a way.
Right.
It's scary.
Yeah, I don't know if we talked about this. I actually worked with Google on their Artisan Machine Intelligence program on AI, and yeah, it's the implications are pretty scary. Although I don't think they're like Terminator scary. They're more like what you're saying. It's like the whole fabric of reality is going to be tipped in the direction of AI. I decided how I felt about it a long time ago, which is I probably don't have a choice. It's either I learn to use it or don't. And so I'm all about it, whether it's good or not. I mean, unfortunately, I think the cat's out of the bag. Or fortunately, because I find
it's
it fascinating.
out of the bag. Yeah. And then the thing is that it's almost like one of my cliches, and not only mine, but this thing, where haven't they ever watched science fiction? Because most of the, post World War II science has been created by kids growing up with pulp fiction, pulp science fiction, pulp noir stories, pulp whatevers. And all of these seed come from these weird, fantastical sci-fi stories. And it always ends badly, right? And then these people grow up and they become scientists and they build these things, knowing at the back of their mind, all of these stories didn't end so well, did they? And the same thing with AI, I think, specifically from, I guess the most famous example would be HAL in 2001, the computer on the ship, which basically just takes over and says, you're no longer running the show.
Yeah.
And I could see those things happening very much so, because it's one thing if you have a weird, like a computer voice, or you have some green data text on a black screen, But now it's like, in our voices, in our aesthetics, there's no real. It's a very fine line between how much we can analyze them, whereas they seem to be analyzing us beautifully.
Yes.
So I think the cat's out of the bag, and the weight seems to be going in their favor. I don't know who they are, but in the favor of AI, basically.
Well, AI is in theory open for the public to use. I mean, but also not, because the most powerful AIs are controlled by big corporations like Google.
Exactly.
But you made
I found that so interesting also when I did this little experiment with software that I won't name. However, it's great. I use it a lot in terms of audio transcriptions.
I do that too.
And it's sort of it's pretty accurate. However, when I read these transcripts, and most of them they're from old films, so the sound quality isn't really that good. So that must have fucked up some things, However, there were these corporate names that came into the thing. Yeah, and I can't explain. There must be something in the code somehow. Either ownership or related ownership, something. It was just too weird, because it's definitely not in the audio.
It just must be more used to seeing those words for.
Yeah, or maybe exactly. Maybe it interprets it as if it were that word.
You made a great point in this book that really struck me, which was I should show it, Source Magic, your new book, which is great. Out now. Source Magic, the origin of art, science, and culture. You made a great point in here that science fiction has created more science than data mining or statistical analysis. It's like, yeah, I had never thought of that before, but that's completely on point. And this is kind of speaking magically. I mean, this is the point I made to Google, whether they listened to me or not. They highly doubtful they did, but maybe not. I just had the head of the program back on the podcast, and he also sees this very magically. The point I made to them is, there are severe risks with AI. There are theoretically existential risks, but more pressingly, there are massive risks of unbelievable social stratification And I kind of told them, look, the problem isn't AI. The problem is the stories that the people who are building it are telling themselves about it. And I don't even mean like the story you market it with to the public to like make them like it. I mean the stories the people are building it are telling themselves internally, which are largely taken from really negative apocalyptic science fiction. Or, and then ultimately I made the point to them, it's like, look, you're fundamental, if you're worried about fundamental cultural biases, you don't program Judeo-Christian ethics into the thing. Make it, use Buddhist ethics, make it a bodhisattva. Don't make it vengeful Jehovah, because you will if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. So.
No, absolutely. And I think also it's very interesting how it sort of snuck into, if we stick with social media as a world or sphere, it came in via the most base vanity in a way. How do I look? So you have these filters, and they're softening, they're funny, you can add these little pet things, it's all fun, this is how I want to present myself. It's never something that increases the wrinkles or gives you a bad light or anything like that. So of course people like, it's a filter that makes me look good. And I think I can see that happening with the textual stuff too, in the sense that have a chatbot write your CV, have a chatbot, your resume, your presentation on social media, and it will all end up with some kind of super bland, non-descriptive, I don't know, fake presentations of who you really are. And of course, one among a gazillion others, so that it's so bland that you can't really see personal qualities or traits anymore.
Yeah,
I mean it's like a dystopic interpretation, but I think that
I don't think
could
that's
be
dystopic.
a risk.
I think that is. We could lose literacy potentially. I think that we already are. But I think that, like for just like a really blatant example of this, imagine student essays in high school and college.
Yes.
Like, is anyone ever going to write an essay ever again? Maybe not. And
there was a piece about that in New York Times just the other day about how certain colleges, and I think high schools also, are addressing this problem, not knowing whether they should give in and accept it, or whether they should just ban all technology in the classrooms. It's
unless you sit there with a ruler in hand watching people write with a pencil. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah,
which maybe they
those
should.
things are gone, right?
No, I think they are. Yeah. Well, I just finished your book, and I have a lot of thoughts. I have to be honest. The chapters about Jen were so emotionally overwhelming for me that it was kind of hard to think clearly about the rest of the book, which is excellent. Because I realized in reading this, I feel like very on the same page with you. And it's like Jen died right when COVID hit, and I never processed it because I immediately had to go into survival mode, fixing, getting out of the pandemic, moving, experiencing all kinds of other tremendous loss in my life. And the dust has just been settling for the last year. So I feel like there's two conversations we can have here, and I'd like to have them both, if you're open to it, potentially in two different podcasts. One is a conversation about Jen, and one is a conversation about source magic and magical anthropology and your ideas in the book. And I feel like those conversations deserve their own breathing room. So if you're open to it, if not, that's fine. We can have one of those conversations today, and then maybe in 2 weeks we can have the second one. And then you get two chances to plug your book. You get two chances to plug your book. So
exactly, but that's not the issue, even though that's great too. But I agree. Because we share that time and space and those memories, and so that's absolutely, I think, fodder for a full conversation. And then source magic is an anthology, so it's like all over the place in a way, but I did think it worked out well as some kind of homogeneous creature. But as you say, without Jen, that's a thing in itself. It's like magic anthropology, and there's literary stuff and film stuff, and so I don't know, I think it sounds like a great idea. I leave it up to you.
I would love that. And I definitely want to spend time on the second podcast talking about the idea of source magic and magical anthropology, because there's some great points raised in the book. So yeah, but are you up to talk about Jen today then?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
I'm not sure where to start, to be honest with you. And I have to warn you, I'm a little sleep deprived, and I'm already a bit emotionally raw because I did a podcast yesterday with Anthropology, who you may know.
Yes.
He is dying of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he decided to refuse treatment. So we had a podcast about that yesterday. So he probably is that. Hopefully that goes well for him. He's very nonplussed about it. Actually, he's very matter of fact about it. But it was still the conversation was still intense and hit me afterwards. So we'll see how long I can keep it together if we start talking about this. But just fair warning.
Yeah.
I don't know where to start. I mean,
well, I can cue the conversation because it's also, I mean, this book now just came out, and I'm working on the next one, which I think I'll wrap up sometime in March, and that's something that contains very personal stuff, because it's basically, I don't know, I'm a bit skeptic towards using the autobiography, but it's basically my story of what I've experienced since I began working with magic. And it's been a long, bumpy road, and met lots of interesting people. But of course, Jen is there as the kind of spine or the red thread. And so I've actually, for the first time in my life, it's like massive work, gone through my entire archive, which has basically just been boxed,
I think you mentioned that last time we were talking.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's just, I'm almost caught up now. But what I'm finding is stuff that I've completely forgotten, not only in diaries, but also actually, faxes and printed out emails and letters, from 86 and onwards.
Wow.
And there I find things that are so incredibly, personal. And again, it's super emotional to think about it, because it's not the macro perspective. We say that we made a record, or we did Topi, or we did whatever, but it was more like on this super personal level, and you could see the human issues, or the humane issues underneath the surface. So that's been very, very interesting, and it has only strengthened my love and admiration for Jan, one of the few really sincere magicians and people in general that I've met, and that taught me a lot of things in terms of how one should, be in life, and a good approach, good attitude. And there's something, vaguely, or not, I was going to say vaguely hippie-ish. There's some kind of ethos there that is very
with Jen,
altruistic or spiritual in a way, but at the same time there's also real pragmatic material magic, and it's just Jen was a super magician, master magician, in so many ways. And I think that for me has been interesting now to really go under the surface and look at these things, and I will weave in a lot of those things in this book, which will be in the coming book, that will be much more personal in a way, whereas the texts in Source Magic, they're also personal. The first one is basically me crying in text right after Jen had died, and the Brooklyn Rail wanted me to write this sort of memento piece. And the other one was when I made a photo book with all of the good pictures that I've taken over the decades, and I wrote this piece about the shape-shifting, the what I call it, the psychic anarcho-sartorialism, how Jen shaped the exterior to reflect the interior, but also the other way around, how that affected the interior by manipulating the outer. There's a lot of magic there that I, being conservative, kind of regular Joe kind of guy, never experimented with at all, or yet.
Exactly.
Whereas for Jan, it was completely what do you call it, meat and potatoes kind of attitude, that you just now it's time to change into this preposterous look.
Jen embodied all these things in a way that most people don't. I mean, Jen, and you mentioned that in these essays where it was I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but you were kind of saying that, Jen really showed that you can't just think about these things. You have to kind of doggedly and ruthlessly manifest them into the world. And that, I think that's true, whether that's the way Jen did it or a different a different method you're a different formula you're applying.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Jen was in, Jen, I mean, Jen was like God to me, beyond a magician or something like that. And so my feelings about Jen are like a cluster of every emotion possible. And it's like a relation of a parent who has passed. So I haven't really, although I mentioned Jen practically on every podcast, it's like I haven't really processed it. And I also tried to kind of stay quiet in the couple of years after Jen passed, because I have a sense of, when someone of that status passes, unfortunately, a lot of people kind of come out of the woodwork and try to claim this or that, or make it about them, which it isn't. And I, so I've tried to keep my head down and keep out of that. And that was something I experienced when Adam Parfrey died. I did a podcast like the next week with someone who had been working on his biography, and his sister got really angry and actually said, "Don't put this podcast out." She was just reacting emotionally, but she was saying, it's like they were very sensitive to kind of that type of thing. And luckily that went well, because it was sincere. But anyways, that's kind of where I've been. I kind of wanted to let things, I didn't want to make it about me, but at the same time, all those stories need to be told. My story with Jen needs to be told, yours as well. You have in many ways. And it sounds like you're continuing to with this book, because all of that stuff is critical. I mean, Jen was not just a master magician, but the living connection to the beats, the living connection to the 60s. You mentioned in this book is like basically the only person that took it seriously enough to carry it forward and militarize it, basically. And that is invaluable. It's like it's such an incredibly important person, and as you know, Jen was so often bitter throughout her life for not being recognized, and that seems to be, as you allude to, changing, unfortunately, posthumously. But yeah,
right. But that's such a classic thing, though, and I think every artist who is aware of art history, etc., I think has that in mind, that maybe it won't happen until I'm gone, and maybe that will be good for people, relatives, etc., living on. However, I think that this thing you say about bringing things to the fore and bringing things forward is so inspiring, and I think inspiring also for other people who are not specifically interested in what Jen brought forward, like the beats, for instance, or a certain kind of music or magic, whatever. But that's one thing. But the other thing is that people can still respect and be inspired by the fact that Jen took the initial youthful, what do you call it? Is there a plural of impetus? Impeti?
Sure.
I don't know. These sparks from
multiple
youth
imps.
and childhood, and nurture them and culture them and value them, because they made a change early on and turned you into who you are, and then just basically examine it and see, is it interesting enough to integrate in myself and bring forward? And Jen did that with a lot of things, and I think that attitude is something that I'm trying to push in the texts that I'm writing, that are let's call them, I don't know, philosophical, meaning they're not about an old film or anything like that. There is like basically this is an example of how you can do things in your own life, and this thing of valuing in intuition, of course, but also to really fetishize all those things and cultural expressions that have meant something for you along the way. Don't discard it. It's good to be a nerd. Go to your comics collection or whatever, revisit those films and see, whoa, this is so cool. Allow yourself to be that, filled with that childish spirit in a way of amazement, because that's an important thing that seems to be going away as you grow older, go into adulthood. It's really nothing that can make you feel, whoa, that kind of thing.
That's such a great point.
At least that's not how I perceive our culture.
Yeah.
It's designed to make you go into thinking about, mortgages and the electricity crisis and the Ukraine war and all these things that are important enough. But if you want to stay alive in the sense being happy and finding meaning, and perhaps you are a creative, it's still important to cherish all the fuel that has moved your vehicle onto, the parking lot where you are right now.
That's such a great point. That's such a great point, especially because a lot of people, Jen would often point out to me, it's like, when people are in their 20s, sure, like they may be interested in these things. And then when they hit 30, it's like a wall and they will all drop off and fall into the social conditioning, which is completely true. And there's a temptation always to, and I've done it too myself. It's just like, well, it's time to grow up and leave these childish things behind. But I think that one thing that obviously Jen had this intense personal mythology as well, with like Brian Jones and the Avengers and all this stuff that was around in their apartment. And in the same way, it's like I think we've yet again seem to be mirroring each other on a certain level, where I also just moved and I've been going through my archives and unpacking and finding all the things from my teenage years or childhood that made me who I am, and re-embracing them instead of discarding them. Like one big thing for me is you may or may not be aware of the World of Darkness role-playing games from the 90s.
I know what they are.
I
haven't played them yet, but I know.
They're great. They're full of occult information, and I was massively into these as a teenager, and of course things like that. It's like you want to hide that from. But now I'm like, you know what? Like this is great. I'm re-embracing this. Just things that, it's like love is hard to come by, both with people and otherwise, and so it's just like why discard it? That's a great point.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that LaVey was very keen about. He actually wove it into his magic system, these sort of personal fetishes, whether they stem from childhood or youth, or if you can find something along the way also that just turns you on so much that it must mean something, because otherwise your psychology wouldn't have that reaction of amazement. So there's a deep-seated resonance there. And as you say, Jen had these things mainly from the 60s, because that was like the formative days. We all carry that. That's very important. Just like I can, romanticize and fetishize like early industrial culture days. That was my teenage year. And just the way how we function. But I think Jen was also very much... again, the name of the documentary, Change Itself, the thing where you have to, I'm not sure I agree. One has to, that sounds too harsh, but Jen definitely felt that you have to go through these things where you do change. And some people, maybe small change is enough, but for Jen, it was big, and it had these sort of, anarcho-sartorial things where the look was changed and your face was mirrored, by the way you look. And I could see it happening very much. For instance, when I fell in love with the mythos, and again, late Robin Gristle, early PTV stuff, that was one look, But when I came into the scene physically, 86, that was the hyperdelic, going to hyperdelic rock.
It's so awesome.
Yeah, that was kind of a, with
good.
God Star and stuff. Yeah. That was a segue into acid house, even more psychedelic or hyperdelic. So that was the thing with these colored braids that he'd gotten from George Clinton and sort of incredibly psychedelic clothes. And then later on, it became something else. In California in the early 90s, was trying to...
transmedia.
Yeah, transmedia and sort of getting into like the romanticism and myth of the Process Church and Timothy Wiley and that kind of thing. So it was a different kind of more mature, I guess maybe California hippie in a way.
Yeah, in a way.
And then
but also kind of being more of a thinker and spokesperson.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course Jackie comes into the picture, and this New York, and you get affected by that. So it's more like clubbing and actual strange parties, dressing up, and then starting to mirror each other.
and all
that too,
the
exactly.
weird voodoo stuff, and Jackie's background with club kids, and I was thinking about this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you have all of these sort of very distinct phases that are reflected in how they looked, how they wanted to appear, and that, of course, is something where this interplay between inner and outer sort of they feed each other, and I think that's it was real fuel for Jen. This thing where you again, no, I don't mean it in terms of force, we see you have to do something, but there was a kind of a positive impetus of needing to change, just because I guess maintaining a level of creativity and mental transcendence that comes from these changes, and I think that was something that Jen was addicted to in a good way. Because Jen had seen that already from, I guess, from mid-60s, how you change things in and on yourself affects the outer, how people treat you, and what you can get what you want by doing this. So that is kind of a causality to it. And a lot of it is predictable. The old conservative geezers will say, oh, that's just a hippie, but other people, young people might say, oh, you're so interesting. So you have this sort of personal needs integrated in this also. And again, I think...
Jen's classic phrase was, "You should never run out of people to be," which
That's
which
a
I
good
love.
one. Yeah,
and she would talk about also the that training with the exploding galaxy in London in the 60s of living in a commune where everyone was expected to create a new character every day, which seems to have been the formative impetus on that. Yeah, and you mentioned conservative people too. It's like I remember like when because we know different gens and the same gens. Some gens we have in common and some we don't, and that's so fascinating. It's like you've known Jen for longer than I have. I just realized this summer will be basically 20 years since I met Jen, so it's almost exactly 20 years. And we are having this conversation on 2023, of course. We missed the 23rd by 2 days, but say Livy. But I was the time when I knew Jen, when I was most involved, was the Pandrogyny era. Like I met Jen right when that process was starting, like a little bit before, and then I was there before the surgery, and then I was there for the surgery, and afterwards the whole New York story period. So the 7 years in which I was most intensively around Jen and learning, and learning and to become a magician, it's like it was not just Jen, it was Jen and Jackie. So my time with Jen was Jen and Jackie, and then of course the Jackie's death was traumatic for everyone. I was at the funeral. It was like losing a parent, and then but that was the time when in which I most knew Jen, and I think that's probably when Jen was the happiest, because after that I felt like, although I think after that Jen started to become more like invested in the art world, which is great. She decided that was the best way to get the message out, but I felt less, certainly much less at home there. My, the work that Jen and I did together was the Psychic Bible, and so my interaction with Jen was about the ideas and about magic. And it was and obviously it was Jen was a different Jen after Jackie died. So, but Jen from the 80s, so. Oh, but one thing, the reason I brought that up was because you mentioned conservative. It's like, I remember when the Pandrogyny thing began. I mean, like now it's like, this type of thing is in the news every day. It's like, then that was truly shocking. It was unbelievably, it was like, how can someone possibly be this out there? Two people to have, and even now, I mean, people to have, it's not just transgender, but two people having surgery to look like each other. It is the most extreme, possibly art experiment of all human history. It's just so out there. And I remember like quote unquote conservative old guard industrial people who knew throbbing gristle just like reacting with total disgust and horror and mocking.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it was really funny. And I think exactly that aspect was very clear to me, like viscerally, after Jackie had died. Jen was very, voluptuous, but yet not a big girl, so to speak. There were boobs and sort of, curvy, but still kind of petite Jen. And we were in Paris in 2008 for a Throbbing Gristle reunion concert. And it was kind of horrendous in the sense that the atmosphere was simply so bad. The concert was okay, it was good, but Jen was there as little English lady, with big boobs, and Sleazy, of course, was very open-minded, and he was like the diplomat in between these fractions of Jen on one side and Kristen Cozy on the other, and it was like the atmosphere was so cold that you could cut it with a knife. But anyway, that kind of look of this really English little lady together with these hordes of like industrial fans.
It's so funny in a way. It's just like the in a way that even the hyperdelic era of getting into ecstasy and peace and love, it deeply alien. It's like they go through the 70s with Throbbing Gristle, where it's like we're Nazis, man. It's like obviously not literally, but playing with all this like extremely dark, aggressive, fascistic imagery, and then going into peace, love, and MDMA. So that I think also alienated people. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic, and there's something I think in all of these things that for superficial people will say that it's just someone who changed his look and is sort of getting attention, whatever. But it was always connected to something that really meant something to Jan, like connecting to Leary, of course, when you're in California, but maintaining then that kind of hippie look sounds so bad, but let's just stay with that then. A kind of Californian hippie look while being in that mind frame. Whereas, of course, when you're in gritty conservative London in the late 70s, you adopt to that kind of look, which is gray and garb and leather and black and, it's harsh. And then moving on to these things, while at the same time doing real studies and inspirational research about these things. Like in the hyperdelic times, I remember in Topi newsletters and stuff, Jen wanted more material about, Leary and also about the diggers and these things that had been going on in the 60s that were really philosophical. It was not just about dropping out. There was substance. There was real substance there. That was true for the process stuff that came in America right when Jan had moved. That fascination. That
Jen was a great champion of psychedelic underdogs throughout the last, through the 60s and before.
Maybe a kind of identification. Who knows?
Absolutely, but also a sense of wanting to connect the dots between them and force people to remember so that it wasn't forgotten. And that I would love to know, what was it in Jen's life in the 60s that made her such a zealot for pushing that forward to the point of devoting her life to it, whether it was seeing Brian Jones as a kid or what, because other people did not do that. And Jen didn't just it wasn't the Museum of Magic. As Jen carried the impetus forward. I mean, she said that, the hyperdelic thing is such an awesome evolution of psychedelic clothing from the 60s. And in the same way that she said the Pandrogyny project was just the extension of the Burroughs Geisen cut up. So it was soldiering it forward into the future.
I think it's there's really so much to go into. I was looking for some other kind of extreme look or extreme interest, but basically all of it, because you were saying that, what was the reason for being so obsessed in a way and carrying these things forward? I think it's a combination, and it all boils down to what was going on in the 60s. Those heavy duty experiments, and of course there was LSD involved, and that psychedelic imprint. It's easy when you're not just getting high on a weekend for, what do you call it, just having fun, but it really does affect you. Then I noticed way back when that there is a sense of almost religiosity. I mean, if you like it, that is. Some people don't like it, but if you have great experiences and they affect you so deeply, then you want to almost automatically to proselytize in a way. You want to tell other people about it. Then you have sort of, I wouldn't go so far as to say like a Christ complex, but you want to share basically all the cool things that you've experienced. And it could be like cool music you've heard, but it could also be inner deep experiences you've had because of this chemical or because of that chemical or because of meditation, whatever. And I think Jen had that nature of wanting to not only share casually among friends, but to actually disseminate, disseminate and distribute knowledge and the same kind of inspiration that was there originally in that system. And I'm not saying it all had to do with LSD, but I think that was one very, very key instigator, those experiences, while at the same time, being a budding artist and not wanting to conform and being where it was basically playful. It was ritual in a way, but it was also playful. It was an art performance in a way, but it was also ritual. So you had this sort of gray area, what I call a colorful gray area, between art and magic and mind expansion and all these things. And of course, if that's your formatting stage, you don't really want to leave, unless you burn out. But I think that if you experience that kind of intense elevation of your mind, of your creativity, then that's who you will want to be throughout the rest of your life. And that's, I think, is correct to say what happened to Jan.
It's a great thing to imprint on, and it's something that needs to be carried forward. I think I wouldn't also discount, Jen was always talking about them, the forces of control, which I'm not sure did her that much good psychologically, but I think that her experiences in English public school probably played a big deal, a big part in wanting to attack control and attack this system that Jen saw the callous leaders of the future Britain being raised in brutality, often directed at her. And, one of the only times I saw Jen flinch at anything was we were watching TV in New York, and there was something about like corporal punishment in schools or something like that. And she just had to leave the room. And I don't think she ever really talked about that period that much, but, clearly whatever happened there was set her, I think, on a lifelong quest of revenge, perhaps.
Yeah, no, I think so. But then again, there are some people who just go into complete denial or depression or I don't know, repression. But Jen at least touched upon that in the documentary, saying that because of all the negative day-to-day things that happened in school, that was one of the reasons why Jen used to spend lunch, for instance, the lunch hour or the lunch half hour in the library organizing books alphabetically.
That's funny.
And that thing
I did the same thing. I didn't know that.
Yes, that thing stuck so much that I think that's why Jen became such a good archivist in a way. Not just of his own bookshelf, but also of the entire archive of
just
PG
phenomenal.
and PTV.
Phenomenal. Yeah. I mean, like as you know, unfortunately never got to see the archive that was taken by Scotland Yard, but I spent a lot of time in Jen's basement in that archive filing it, and then I basically processed all those files into the Psychic Bible, the second one. And I really felt this just overwhelming sense of, I mean, Jen asked me to do it, but I just had this overwhelming sense of this has to be preserved, and it has to be I think Jen often occasionally, Jen recognized that I had a very like how do I put it, kind of like compartmentalizing and librarian like brain,
Right.
and that I could she could have ideas that for her just came out of just the artistic process, and then I could then write an essay about it where all the academic links, same as you, right? So I was spent a lot of time putting that material back together and kind of making a cohesive whole out of it. It's just phenomenal archives. Jen archived everything.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, absolutely. And
what happened to those, by the way? Those got sold to the Tate Modern or something?
Yes, exactly. Tate Britain, actually.
Okay.
And they're there. They're there for research purposes. I think some people have. I have not been there. But I mean, it's totally accessible if you have a valid like project or something.
Okay.
The only thing that I saw recently that accesses that is it's a weird fucking book that came out just recently. It's called Art and the Occult, which is such a vague title, but it's basically a catalog of, I think it's an exhibition at the Tate, or maybe the book is a standalone thing. Basically, it's stuff from their own collection, stuff from the Tate collection that has to do with the occult in a way. And I mean, that's a big umbrella. You can fit a lot of things underneath that umbrella. But I love the pictures. It's a great book, if you enjoy this kind of art, whatever it is. But there's only one Jen thing there, and that's like a flyer for someone selling a dream machine in the US. Okay. I guess or mid-90s probably, and that's the thing. And it's credited to Jen, and then in some other places it says from the archive of Genesis P-Orridge. So that comes from the thing. And also another real fuck up on that note in that book is that it's not, Jen is not indexed at P. P-Orridge, comma, Genesis. It's on G, Genesis P-Orridge, whereas everyone else is like correct. So that's obviously weird. It's an indexer or a writer, probably an academic that has no clue of what she's talking about.
Don't they have Google?
Yeah. No, I have yet to go through that. I think that book will actually merit the introduction for Fenris Wolf 12, because it pisses me off when it sounds so good. Tate, they make a book about art and the occult, and they have so much cool stuff, and they can't even contextualize it correctly, despite the fact that the past 10, 15 years have been all about this. Occulture, academics, occulture in the pop culture. People should just pay attention to what's out there and not just be sitting in their blinders in their archives. But anyway, the Jen archive is at the Tates, and it's there for people who want to do real research also.
That's great. That's really good to hear. And as far as I can say, like the Psychic Bible was, as far as I'm concerned, the entirety of the magical material in the archive. I did not leave anything out. And I spent 5 years on that, including time spent hustling the book, eventually getting it to Feral House. That was everything in the archive, and also edited and put into a digestible and organized format. But the material that went into that was just kind of like loose papers and flyers and mimeographs and old Topi transmissions and things like that. So but yeah, Jen truly did archive everything. You never know. Maybe the Scotland Yard exhibition will resurface, or not exhibition, the Scotland Yard, what they stole from the House of Brighton may resurface. Maybe if somebody decides they can make money off it, you never know.
Yeah, but let's stay with the Psychic Bible, because I've been having it out because I'm working with this sort of historical stuff, and it's good. It's a good, solid. Well done, Jason. It's very well put together. But it's also, what struck me is that it's amazing. I mean, if you look at stuff in other, let's call it contemporary traditions, and we could even include the Thelemic stuff there, because there are new things being added to the canon of Thelema that is not Crowley. You just have to accept. Could be biographies or interpretations, whatever. It's a good culture. They create new stuff. The same thing is true for the Satanic, or at least the Church of Satan, with Blanche writing a book, and there's the Satanic Warlock, and things are added to the canon basically.
Yeah.
And chaos magic has always been very healthy and vital.
You think so? I mean,
I was going to say I have lost track of this past year, so I don't really know. But anyway, it used to be very.
It was incredibly thriving and vibrant, and I always saw Topi and Jen as part of that current. And,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to get to was that when I flipped through Psychic Bible, it's like, wow, this book is amazing, because it's such a powerhouse of radical approaches to magic, to psychology, to I don't know, a mind frame of resistance that is non-denominational. You can talk about control, or as you said before, them, in that kind of, it's a kind of a paranoid terminology in a way.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of general resistance to anything that oppresses you as an individual. It could be any kind of, political system or party or allegation or allegiance. I mean, but it's such a powerful thing, and to have it collected like that, like the Psychic Bible, that packs a punch.
It really does.
Because on their own, all the pieces are, they're great, they're really radical and stuff. But when you do contextualize it like that, then it becomes something. In a way, it becomes denominational because it's Topi.
Right.
I certainly don't mind that. But then if you look at what kind of signal does this denomination carry, and it's a fucking strong signal, and it's
really
radical.
Is. And I did that because I wanted that book to stand next to the Crowley Blue Brick and the Golden Dawn by Rigardi. But like it is frustrating. It's like, particularly both of us having had this experience of Jen, it's like Topi was and is so forward thinking that the quote unquote larger occult scene, whatever it is, has still not absorbed the Psychic Bible. To be honest with you, I have not absorbed the Psychic Bible, even though I spent 5 years looking at it, because there's so much material in there. It was just like when you're looking at something up close, you don't really see it. I wasn't able to get the experience of like, okay, somebody hands me the book and I try the exercises and work through it or something. That wasn't I was focused on editing. But I have to tell you also
that I remember already. I can't recall which year it was, but before I sort of got to know Jen physically, the first time was in '86. But before then, I'd been a Topi subscriber and starting experimenting with these things. And for me, it was very inspiring. I liked psychic TV. There was a lot of information in the LPs, and then you became a subscriber, and you got little newsletters, and the stuff highly inspiring for me because of resonance. Something in that thing, in the material, spoke to me in a way. But then the key thing was actually getting the Gray Book. And that, to me, at that time, I had already done the basic sort of teenage thing, Crowley, LaVey, a bit of Golden Dawn, Colin Wilson's The Occult, just like the basic stuff. Without delving into it on a technical level, because I think I was too young for that at the time. But anyway, here comes Gray Book. And it sort of really knocks your socks off, because it speaks to you in your language of exactly that era, that time, and has a stripped kind of look, simple, stark, elegant, with those tipped-in photographs. And it really blew my mind, because it was magic that you could immediately understand, that you understood that this is something that I can apply. This is not. I haven't had to go through the rigid rigmaroles of any of the Crowley orders, hierarchical structures, occultic nincompoopish terminology. Just straight signal. And it's still so strong.
When you got that book for the first time at that, where it was like, I'm trying to put it in context for now, because when I got the Gray Book, it was a text file on a website. in the 90s. And that's not quite the same. And now like everyone and their mother has seen somebody talking about how to do a sigil. It's ubiquitous.
Right.
But at the time, I'm guessing that was probably completely fresh. Or maybe not.
It
I don't
was
know.
fresh. It's definitely in the zeitgeist, because there was IoT on the one hand, and they were really championing Spare.
Yeah.
And Topi had also completely integrated and championed Spare. And then there was at the time, the original editions, they were few. I mean, of Spare, they were very rare and very expensive, even at that time.
I think Jen mentioned buying some of them for like £20 from Atlantis Bookshop or something like that when nobody cared about them. And Jen was also instrumental of along with Kenneth Grant and people like that, of getting people's attention.
Absolutely.
On Spare.
But there was this bookstore in Leeds called the Sorcerer's Apprentice.
It's infamous,
and they created a book that meant so much to me, and I think to many people. It was like the collected works of Austin Osman Spare, and it was nicely done. It's just facsimile from the books from the collection of Lionel Snell, Ramsey Dukes, and that was feasible. You could afford that as a young person, and then you had everything. You had all of Spare's books in one volume, and that came out. I think the first edition was with an intro by Pete Carroll, and the second one had an introduction by Lionel Snell, and I think that was in 1987.
Is that at all different from There's that three book set from Inferno to Zos, and then there's the Zos Speaks book by Kenneth Grant, and I've never actually seen copies of those. I'm curious if there is additional writing by Spare in them that is not widely available, or actually just what is in those books? Because it's like $1,000 on they're like $1,000 on eBay.
Right, but that's because they're on I guess it's Fulgur or Starfire, one of those companies that's just what happens. Sauce Speaks is a much more personal thing. It's not an anthology of old stuff. It's correspondence and definitely extra material there. It's not a reproduction of his books. It's a book about him in a way. From Inferno to Sauce, I don't know what that is. Is that
They're
sounds like
3 big cloth books like this, and it was prior to Fulgur.
Now I know
think.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's Mandrake. That's
Yes.
Tony Naylor. Yeah. Okay. I know. Yeah, those are facsimiles. Those are Spare's books.
So there's nothing in those that is not widely available.
I would say so. I think Vanessa has those. I can check that, but I think those are just Tony Naylor style anthologies.
One thing
where
that
Saul Speaks is something else.
One thing that has not happened. You should do this if you can. A coffee table book of Spare's artwork. That's never happened. Like most of it you can't see. I have a crazy Austin Spare story that relates to Jen that you'll love, and it demonstrates how much of a magical vortex Jen was. I met Jen 2003, and the way that I met her was I went to go interview her for Disinformation, who I was writing for at that time, and then I became an intern and became their main editor. So I went, and they were connected with Jen because of DisinfoCon. So I went to go interview Jen, and I didn't know what to expect. It's like somebody like hanging from hooks from the ceiling or something like that. God knows, so I walk up, and I of course meet a very, very nice English housewife who has me up for tea and with Lady J, and they're both absolutely lovely. And then I was walking, and I'm 21-year-old, acne college student, and I'm walking down the steps of the Gates Institute afterwards, and Jen's opening the door for me, and then she just turns at me and says, "Now you have to do it." And I'm like, okay. And that was just a tremendous. I was like, why would this person even have spent time with me? But then that relationship deepened, and I then asked formally, I did the thing, tell me about magic with Jen, like Geisen, and then it became an apprenticeship. But Shortly after that, I spent a summer directly interning for Jen. I think it was in 2003, and they were still reeling from. I mean, Jen was still processing and so heartbroken over everything that had happened in the UK, and she'd been in America for quite a while. But and this is prior to any of the art world interest or anything like that. And they were both living in, as you know, a one-bedroom railroad apartment in Brooklyn, which was a magical vortex. But Jen was not widely known at all outside. I would say not known outside of the occult world or industrial music fans. And so I spent the summer. Actually, spent quite a lot of time living there, sleeping on the floor next to Spike the ferret. If you remember Spike, yes, and just kind of getting an education. But then I went to London to finish my final year of school, and at that time I was very heavily involved with the IoT for a long time actually. I'm not anymore, but because I'm on my own vibe, man. But I was at that time. So I was kind of over there hanging out with all these chaos magicians. But Jen gave me the address of, was it Jen? No, this was so weird. It wasn't a direct connection. So I went from Jen's house to sleeping on the floor in Northwest London, ironically close to where Kenneth Grant lived, but I didn't know that at the time. And I spent a month looking for a flat to live in that a student could afford. And finally, I saw an ad at my university with just this little note with musical notes written on it saying, like, do you like fun? Are you a student? Here, you can have this flat for whatever amount it was. And I was like, and it was in Notting Hill. And I was like, how is it possible for a place to be this cheap in Notting Hill? This is crazy. It was affordable for a student. So I went and I checked it out, and I walk up, and the person that lives in this flat is an upper crust heiress who's really into, like, she's talking about like her daddy and the aristocracy and how she goes horse riding in the Jersey Islands and so forth, and just seems like this very like upper class, you know, English woman. And then I look up on the shelf and she's got every fucking Kenneth Grant book, and I'm like, I don't mean to be funny, but why do you have those books? And then she says, "Oh, you must meet my ex-husband." So this woman turns out to be an art restorer, and she's showing me pictures of spare paintings that she had been restoring. Here's the Jen thing. I think like I'm so glad I'm getting this on tape. I think a day or two before I left New York, Jen was telling me a story about having those spare paintings in the Topi house in Brighton, and then watching sparks come out of them. Like just a spark would emerge at night. And there was, of course, this story. Apparently some Topi people decided to take acid with one of the paintings and it went horribly wrong. But Jen said that like they would see sometimes sparks of light coming out of Spare's paintings. So I'm talking to this woman who's an art restorer for Spare, of spare paintings. It's like, okay, how the hell, like how? It's like beyond synchronicity. And then she starts saying like, yes, and as I was restoring them, I saw sparks coming out of them. And I was just like, oh, fuck, okay. And then she's just like, you must meet Charles. So she takes me to meet her ex-husband, who is British, you know, ruling class. And he turns out to be the second biggest spare collector in the world. And he's got all of those paintings all over the walls. He had like 70, 80 spare paintings, and I've never seen them anywhere else. There were ones with, and interestingly, there were ones with specific material from Crowley book. Like there were ones with cliphotic sigils in them, for instance, from Liber 231. And it's like stuff I've never seen it on the internet, never seen it published. Just so much stuff. And there's more hilarious stories that emerge from that. Like I ended up going with him to meet kind of like one of these English restaurants that only the upper crust can go to, and it's so expensive there's no prices on the menu. And meeting his friend who was a POW in a Japanese POW camp, and then went to India to meet Krishnamurti, And at that time, it was the 2004 protests, of the Iraq War, which were the biggest protests at that time in history. And so I'm sitting there with like these two extremely upper crust English guys, and they're just kind of like looking down from the second floor at like the protest going by, and and one of them says like, "I don't know about these protesters. They're quite grubby, aren't they?"
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, and there's more from then on, but that was so fucking bizarre, particularly the spark. And I mentioned it to Jen, and Jen thought it was hilarious, and Jen was like, "Yes, Spare must like you. Watch out, he's not all friendly." I was like, yeah. And this guy, by the way, told me some crazy stories. He said that one of his, well, they're so extreme, I probably should not mention them on the podcast. I'm getting that feeling, but of people working with Spare stuff and it going wrong. Anyways, that jumped out of my brain to share.
Yes, I think someone should make a Spare coffee table book. I don't think it'll be me, but I think Fulgur certainly they've done a good job. But of course, there's more. As you say, some private collectors. I know for a fact that Jimmy Page started collecting early on, also, and then there are a few others that are sort of in the Topi ripples. Ossian Brown of Cyclope.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Jen had actually given me Ossian's contact to look up when I was there, and I asked. I tried to get Ossian on the podcast, but he doesn't. He's very private, which is fine. But I met Ossian at the same time, and I seem to remember there was some. He was in Coyle at the time, and I think that there was some Spare connection there as well.
Oh, absolutely. They had, I was there, they had an entire room called the Spare Room. That's where guests stayed. There was just so many spares in there. And that's
so
a funny story.
I met these two people within the space of a week.
Yeah. And I mean, I have a funny story from that. I visited Coyle in 97. And we had a nice time just, going to dinner and going back to their place and just chit-chatting and listening to music. And took some pictures of them as I do, and it was so nice. It was we'd been in contact before, used to send each other records and stuff, and then we met the year after at the big Crowley show, and it was just like a good friendship that lasted all the way till Sleazy died, basically. Then in the aftermath, we're now probably 2016, meaning like 6-7 years after Sleazy died. Then a friend of Vanessa's who was in charge of the estate, helping to organize the estate, Sleazy's estate, sent us two pictures of me in the spare room that Sleazy had taken at that same visit. That I had forgotten completely about that, but that was for me like, whoa, full circle. Wow. So I took a picture. Sleazy took a picture, and I'm standing there in front of this very long, horizontal spare. It's beautiful.
That's great. They must have been a trip to hang out with.
Absolutely, but not. I didn't get the what do you call it? Exuberant. I got the nice and friendly and cozy, drinking tea and coffee and listening to music side. Not the extravagant.
Oh, I see. Yeah, not the rent boys and methamphetamine side.
No. And I'm sure that was fun too. But no, it was just super nice, and I think it was at a point where I think people projected other things on me than merely being like. A close Gen ally.
What do you mean by that?
No, what I mean is that we'd been already friends for, at that time, 97. That was like 10 years, and that's a long time in Genland. A lot of people had relationships and they were over after 10 years. And also we'd been working so closely together in Topi and the At Stockholm CD, stuff like that. So people were projecting that, I was part of that. But in the mid-90s, I also branched out in other things and did other things magically and, worked with other people. And at that time, Coyle was playing together with Hymenaeus Beta, who was also a friend and an associate of mine, and still is. But that, I think, opened them up to the fact that Carl is nice and he's made some cool music, but we can let him in because he's not only Jan. It's not only about Jan. It's about magic in general and cool psychedelic and music and stuff like that. So
yeah, I got that a little bit too. Now that you're bringing this up, it's like kind of like interacting with people, particularly in the chaos magic scene who have been around for a while. There was a sense when I talked about knowing Jen so closely. It's like you're like an extension of Jen. Like you're like in Jen's cult. Yeah. And particularly when I will say, it's like even when I was in England, this was in like 2004, the reactions to Jen when Jen came up were pretty uniformly negative. Mm-hmm. And I never really got a sense of what that whatever went down before Jen left the UK.
Mm. Well, I think it's just part of the psychology is that I'm a very friendly person. I have a very hard time getting angry or so disappointed that I completely discard people. And I think I don't know of anyone else basically who was on friendly terms with Jen for such a long time. Actually, I do know one other person, Kathleen Gray from the October Gallery. They were also friends for the entire period, basically. But anyway, I think with people having very distinct business things with Jen, that created problems. Yeah. Eventually, and you could say that. Sleazy had they were friends. They had very good interaction and a good third mind, but there were also business things involved, both with TG and also Psychic TV, and it's very noticeable vis-a-vis Chris and Cozy. That was all about negative business, and there were other examples of that also. So I think on a real friendship level or on a real, let's call it a real magical level, there were never really any problems. The problems had to do with, mundane, banal, money-related business things. And it's unfortunately so common, that where someone, for instance, owes someone £10 in 1982, and with the emotional interest added, it becomes a huge magical conflict, a magical war.
Well, that is something that Jen dwelt on consistently, shall we?
Yeah.
And that was
So that's I think that's the reason why you have people falling out, or when Jen was mentioned, as you say, in certain surroundings, it's like, no, we can't do that. And then of course you have the primitive sidings, which is so pathetic. I was thinking, for instance, of Cozy's book, with these allegations.
That's fucking ridiculous. And then the Guardian article that came out, that made me really mad. I mean, I mean, who knows? I mean, like, look, it's like an ex-girlfriend airing dirt. I mean, who knows what actually happened? But it was clearly vindictive. And the second part of when I said I was getting negative reactions to Jen, in it, like my response to that was always an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. And because with Jen there was love, with the occult scene there was not. There was just interest in this topic, and you know how edgelordy people can be in this scene. But it's like I go to Jen's house and it's like mom and dad, or mom dad and dad mom, Jen and Jackie, and it was this very, very loving, accepting energy, which unfortunately wasn't quite there. It was still there, but it wasn't quite there in the same way when Jackie died, because Jen was in a lot of pain, a lot. So I was always just protective of, it's like, you don't know her like I know her, but I forget how I got on that topic. Cozy, and I think there's been other hit pieces, but like who hasn't had hit, like it's like who of cultural interest hasn't like had this happen to them? Unfortunately,
everyone. It's part of the game. Apparently. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something in the book too. It's like Jen has a lot of grievance collectors, Fred Gianelli, for instance, and you make the point, like, where, would these people have careers without Jen?
No,
certainly not in his case. I mean,
no.
I'll be honest. My relationship with Jen was, as we say, painful but fabulous. There were many ways in which I did feel personally let down by Jen. There were many ways that I felt guilty that I had let down Jen. This is not things I'm going to air on the podcast or anything like that. But it was complicated, but that was always, I think, overridden by how much I love Jen and continue to. And the phrase loyalty does not end with death is a real thing. And, I said when I was in the hospital with Jen shortly before she died, I said to her, I think you mentioned this too in the book. I said to her at her bedside, it's like, yeah, I will continue fighting. And Jen said, I know you will. And that, it's like, it's when Jen said, you have to do it now, I took that seriously. I still do. I always will. And I gather from the book that you feel the same. And that's really important. And so what's the point I was trying to make with this? I'm not sure. It is tough to see like the grievance mongers, it's like, I don't know. It's
it's so easy also. It's like a cheap shot, it's like kicking someone who's lying down, whatever. And it's just pathetic. But I think it could also be, what do you call it, when you feel like rejected. I think Jen was very charismatic, very magnetic. There was magical power in the sense that he was like a procreator or a proto-creator. Ideas came from within and made people fascinated, and they wanted to be around this powerhouse, this magnetic pull. There are very few people like that. I mean, I think they exist more in the art sphere than in the magic sphere. Usually magic is something where you take something old and you might repackage it in a way. In art, in more cases, you can find people who actually come up with something new.
Or in politics, or in business. I mean, there's a certain aspect of Jen that is similar to Burroughs in a way. It's like underneath all of this was how do I put this? I think somebody who had a very clear sense from her background in education and cultural background coming from England and having this high level of education, that she's kind of there to civilize people in the British sense and very much be in charge, and had because Jen got the public school education that the future leaders of England had. And so it was, and that was always there underneath everything.
Yeah, I think also it could be a psychological compensation from having been bullied also, regardless of what kind of school. Then you want to be on top and you want to be the best. It's like people who are have a problem with connecting with the mother or father. They can become overachievers, overachieving for mommy, stuff like that. And I think that Jen had such an incredible work ethic. That was one of the things that attracted me in the first place.
That's like probably one of the biggest things I got from Jen.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes from something, and you can use it to your advantage, and it's great. And of course, one has to be careful so one doesn't actually concretely burn out. But again, that becomes a problem when you have like a coterie or a small group, like in a band, for instance, or just a group of similarly minded people, where you realize that, whoa, this person is better or more influential or more powerful in a way, but can I deal with it? And then you deal with it either way. I accept it. I can learn something. I can hopefully teach that person something, but I learn from that person, has more experience. Or the other reaction is usually, no, fuck that person. I'm not going to take this. He's a bad person, Meaning it becomes like a compensation to protect yourself from your own feeling of inferiority. And that's what happened for sure in all of those band contexts, because we have to be, I think, very, very honest in saying that I know for a fact that Sleazy was an absolute musical genius, absolutely, and Jen was an artist slash magician, or a magician slash artist, and without Jen and a bit of Sleazy, there would not be any interest in Throbbing Gristle at all. You know, they did their things, you know, Chris being like, you know, the synth guy, and Cozy did her thing and stuff like that. But what it will always be remembered for is an output that, you know, contains them, but it was all about the ideas and concepts that came from Jan.
What they were, absolutely.
It's that simple. And those people had a problem with that when it was all over. And the same thing can happen in any band. You know, there's always one driving force, has ideas and a will to be seen, you know, usually the singer.
Every morning I wake up and thank my lucky stars that I'm not a musician, particularly now. Because I mean, I think this is just inevitable for bands, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just part of music. Chris, I wouldn't necessarily, I'm not like pro Chris and Cozy here. It's like with Jen, you always have to pick a side, and it's always Jen's side. But I will say, like, Chris Carter in particular is like very, I've noticed, very revered in the electronic music, like people who build synths scene. So I wouldn't necessarily say I think he built a lot of that equipment that they used. I think that was a pretty profound part of it.
And it's wonderful stuff. So I'm not disrespecting them. They're wonderful people in their own right, but they are not as advanced as Jen was or as Sleazy was, and they bore grudges for a long time for very petty reasons. And it's just sad. And also,
life is too short for this.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's just, why bother with these petty fucking conflicts that happened around 1980? You know, get a fucking life. And Jen certainly had a good life, rich, varied, magical, filled with incredible adventures, like, you know, beyond belief meetings, swimming in synchronicities, just like any good magician does. So, and that stings in other people's eyes. It hurts other people who have not led those lives.
I don't understand that at all. I mean, it's like, particularly because Jen was the center of the show wherever Jen was. That's for sure. I mean, I was thinking about this last night. Like they talk about Steve Jobs having a reality distortion field. Like, you should have met Genesis P-Orridge. It's like when you were around Jen, reality was what Jen said it was, and whatever drama was going on, like, that's what was happening. Like, that's the entirety of what's happening. And the cosmos that Jen created, that's your reality when you're around Jen, and the people that were circulating, that was part of the projection of Jen's will. And I was thinking about, like, as I mentioned, I was getting emotional as I was reading your essays, and it gave me a great window, and thank you. It gave me a great window and opportunity to start at least beginning to say, well, how do I feel? And I had an image last night of Jen as both a white and black hole. And what I mean by that is Jen was unbelievably creative, and not just creative of art, but turning other people into creators, and unleashing and giving people permission to be that, which was huge. And you can see, you know, like, even naming people like David Tibet and so on. And but Jen also very much had a destructive dark side, and that affected people around her as well. And that was there's a lot of pain and sadness for me from that time, because there was a lot of pain and sadness from Jen and Jackie, particularly after Jackie died, but even before that. And so I kind of had this image of, like, Jen being this white hole of constant creation, but also this black gravitational vortex where it's like, you can get sucked in and lose yourself. For sure,
no, it's like a Shiva aspect. You know?
Yeah. But that's part of it. You know, it's like, this is not something I that's part of it. And for me, I got to a point where, at least in my own process and training, I decided, particularly later when Jen was using, it's like, later, I'm not sure there was later. But you know, it's like I can either be around Jen and do whatever Jen says, or I can respect Jen by carrying on the work with what I'm and pushing forward instead of, because at that point I'm in my late 20s, instead of kind of like being subsumed by this person totally. But I didn't see that as a rebellion. I saw that as an upholding of what I had been taught and kind of leaving the nest to become my own magician.
Yeah, that's great. And I think also it's not the revelation can be powerful for you or me or other individuals involved in the same dynamics with strong magicians. But it's not unique. This is how it's been going on since, I wouldn't say time immemorial, but at least within our kind of Western civilization in a way, where you've had people who have, as they say now, identified as occultists or magicians, and some of these have been very powerful and thereby also gone through occulturation and created an occulture that has seeped into the culture proper. So there have always been this thing. We think of it romantically like sorcerers, and then you have the sorcerer's apprentice, but that's a real thing because it stems back from medieval times when each guild had their apprentices, and then you worked and you became a master. That's where it comes from, that kind of dynamic, you know.
Oh, I had a very, I don't want to interrupt, but I had a very clear sense of that at the time. It's like, this is a very old process. I mean, literally showing up on Jen's doorstep and then sweeping the ashram, cleaning the dishes. I mean, like literally, it's like, this was a very, there were so many levels to it that were mythological like that. And even classically, I remember going out with Jen and Jackie when I was first living with them. And there was kind of like this testing period where Jen was trying to push me away to see if perhaps literally or perhaps to see if I was serious. But I remember going out with them to, there was a, do you remember J.T. Leroy?
Yes.
It was like this literary fraud phenomenon. Well, this was before this was revealed. So we went out to the J.T. Leroy book release. And like, I remember like, I never forget this because Courtney Love was there and just like came up drunkenly, sat on Jen's lap and started singing God Star to her. And I was like, this is the biggest train wreck of a human being I've ever seen. This is scary. And I'm just sitting there like this, like very innocent, like 21-year-old. But I remember Jen leaned over to me and says like, you know, I don't know who you think I am, Jason. Like, I'm just a psychedelic refugee from the 60s. And so there was like a lot of this, like, I don't know anything, you know, and to be fair also, it's like in terms of ritual technology or occult learning or anything like that, I didn't get that from Jen. Like I got that from reading, and I got that from the IoT, honestly, like practicing magic. But what I Jen brought me up so many levels to see what it just osmosis by example, I think, rather than like giving me homework or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. But the question is if that's maybe always the case. You know, maybe that's how it actually works. Because if you look at it from the point of view of going into a more classic conservative structure, like of a Freemasonic nature, and you get information that you have to study to make a test. You know, it's like maybe that's not a good dissemination of real magical current. You know, it could be of knowledge of some kind, like the Golden Dawn. They had their knowledge lectures for just establishing a basis of classic esoteric knowledge. But I think that I don't think that, you know, Burroughs and Geisen were talking to Jen specifically about, you know, doing the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram.
Right. I don't think they knew it.
No, I mean, it's a different kind of transmission that gelled into their specific third mind, you know, and then it gelled into someone else's third mind with Jan. And before that, Burroughs probably, you know, could be Herbert Huncke, whatever, or some other person who instructed them in something, where Geisen could have had that with John Starr Cook in North Africa, or with some real Berber magicians in Morocco. Wow. You know, it's all these confluences of consciousness that merge in people, and then if they're good, they will pass it on and
Yeah.
not hog
You
it.
have to. You have to. Otherwise, it's just
Yeah.
You have to.
So I think that's what happened with Jen. Jen was like beyond a flare. It was more like a fire or a firework.
Yes.
And eventually all things go out. And, I have no idea where the flare or the firework went. But I'm very happy about having been exposed to it.
Yeah,
It's
I feel
been a
very,
big part of
very,
my life, and it still is, and it probably always will be.
yeah.
And I'm certainly doing my best to do what I can do, not exactly in the same current, because it's my current.
Right. Well, that's great. That's great. I mean, that's
but just carrying a huge chunk of the current that we shared into the cauldron, so to speak.
Absolutely. It's so important. And I'm thinking, as you were talking about that, you mentioned Masonic structures, and I was thinking about, even like the Golden Dawn, like, okay, in theory, they have this structure with knowledge lectures and things like that. But Crowley, when he goes into the Golden Dawn, like he gloms onto Mathers and is basically like emulating Mathers, and then he gets more further transmission from Alan Bennett. And so it's kind of like, and I've had this experience too, where it's kind of like the quote unquote magical society is more or less just a sandbox in which you may meet people to have that type of relationship with, and it may not be formal at all.
Even
within
exactly. It's like
little
playgrounds that attract different kinds of kids.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think, at a certain point, I love what you're nonstop productive, Carl. It's intimidating and it's inspiring. It's great. I know that Jen, particularly as we went through the Psychic Bible, was so clear on the importance of books. And I think now I want to underline that even more. Like now, as we go into, just as I'm thinking about it, as social media has further destroyed people's ability. It's like the internet, even in the 2000s, as it was being commodified, there were still like web pages that would stay there. Now it's just whatever the fuck this social media thing is, right? So and now we're going to enter this period of AI where you won't even be able to trust whether something was even written by a human or not. So the importance of books, it's like, look, I mean, there could be, you're talking about flares, but like, hey, maybe there's like an EMP someday, all the computers go out, or people, like that movie Idiocracy, just become too dumb to use them, which is more likely.
Very prophetic movie.
But books will still be there, So.
Yeah, exactly. No, I see it exactly like that, and I think that on some slightly more gloomy days, I think that I feel that I'm working for posterity, not necessarily my own, but just the fact that certain portions of formulations stay on for later generations. And then you could say that, well, aren't we all actually insignificant in the end? Maybe so, but if it gives me meaning to work with these things, then I'll do it. And then whether it can be useful in the future, I could never tell anyway. It's like why bother speculating about that? I just write what I write.
No, it is important. It's critical. I mean, I feel the same way. It's so critical, and I think work like the work you're doing, hopefully I'm doing the work, like definitely the work that Jen was doing of bringing all this stuff together. It's like that's the Western, like this is the Western esoteric tradition. It's archiving it, making clear everything that's happened that people need to remember. I mean, now I meet like young people that I'm teaching or that come work for me, and like it's like they don't know any of this. It's like they're completely oblivious to like even U.S. history, let's say from the 90s, or the history of protest movements, or like anything that is outside of what the school system wants them to know, which is not a whole lot. And so like this stuff has things that you and I take for granted, like for instance, Anton LaVey, like it's like everyone knows who Anton LaVey is, like everyone knows who Genesis P-Orridge is. Well, maybe not. I mean, it's like these things can vanish like fairly quickly, and it needs to be preserved. So
yeah.
Anyways, that was my little rant for today, but it's critical. But yeah, that was kind of what, the black hole, white hole thing was kind of what came up for me when I was reading your book, where it's like constant creation, but it's constant creation. But make no mistake, it's like if you're in Jen's world, you're in Jen's world on Jen's terms. Jen is what's happening. Other things are not happening. It's like Jen is whatever's happening with Jen. That's what is happening. So I think at a certain point, which I think Jen expected and hoped for as well, I would hope, the apprentice has to find their own footing and find their own current, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to be quiet now. Just
and
just leave the space open for what's coming up for you.
Yes, I mean, this is just it's a huge topic. Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the things that we talked about a lot, specifically during those, active Topi days, was like, some, let's call them metaphysical topics, like, like what is time, and looking at time. And Jen was kind of obsessed with that, trying to define time or warp time or bend time, time mirrors, when analyzing Spare's art. And, it's really, really great stuff. And I think that also rubbed off on me. It's not that I'm obsessed with time in a way, but we certainly applied long-term arcs of creative endeavors. Like first, I met Jen in '86. That was basically in my function as a curious little Topi guy, but mainly for my rock and roll fanzine called Lollipop, to do an interview. So that was more like a fanboy thing. And then in '88, that was more Topi oriented interview. And then it just sort of rolled on. And then we decided that, well, we have this series of interviews. It's very interesting because time has passed, right? So you have a perspective. A lot of things have changed. And then what if we actually serialize and plan for going to different places on the planet and make interviews there, so that seeps in to the ambience, atmosphere, conversation, topics, etc. And that's basically what we did, because we did, in Nepal and in Paris, in New York several times, and in London, in Stockholm, and I think some other places too. Yeah, Norway. Anyway, so that was the idea. Like, let's just build a book. Let's not just do an interview and talk about the new record or something magical. Let's have these conversations as specific chapters of a book that will one day be published. And then so that's what happened, and that made it easy for me also, who sort of ran the show in a way, to see as an editor, perhaps there was a subject missing. Perhaps there was some topic that we hadn't touched upon that was relevant, and so we could sort of guide the vessel in a way. And eventually, when the leukemia became too pronounced, we decided that, okay, let's wrap this up now. And that was sort of parallel to Jen being whipped in a way to wrapping up non-binary, so it was like kind of a parallel process for Jan about going through memories and going through his life, basically. But anyway, I am so happy, and I see it as a great magical working both on Jen's part and on my part, that we actually got it to be published, and I got copies by some DHL or whatever in time for Jen's 70th birthday. And that's what we had decided. So Jen got copies of Sacred Intent for the birthday. And then unfortunately a couple of weeks later it was over. But at least that was a happy time to be able to look in a nice book.
Yeah, that really,
and read all these things that we talked about since 1986. And
it's such a cool book.
Something you can't decide to do today. we can't go back like 40 years and make those conversations. So having that long-term perspective on work, I think, can be very interesting if you have this kind of good relationship with someone. It doesn't need to be a magician. It could be like with an artist, whatever. But that was something that our talks about time manifested in this kind of long-term approach. And it was so funny also. I think the album that we talked about last time, Loyalty Does Not End with Death, that was our third spoken word collaboration. And as it turned out,
yeah, I love those, by the way. Just PS,
yeah,
just on my own fanboy note, those are awesome.
But that's so funny because this is the first one came out in fucking 1990.
Those are some of my favorite Jen recordings, actually.
Oh, mine too.
Because it's just like,
but I'm partial.
Well, absolutely, but it's like Jen Unleashed, really, without the pressure of having to conform something into a pop song or something like that. Yeah.
But then the second one, Wordship, came out in 2004.
Yeah, that one's fucking awesome. I love that one. I know. Yeah.
And then the third one, we did in 2017-18, and it came out in 19, but it's still another 14 years. So we have these 14-year cycles between these three albums.
Not to interrupt, but is Wordship the one with the? I think it's that one where there's a song where Jen is looking around and saying like "tasty souls." Like talking about wanting to eat souls, or was that a different?
No, that's
okay. That's a different record.
I know what you mean, but that's something else. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wordship.
But so
Jen,
anyway,
Jen gave me one of the early demos of Wordship, I think, actually. Anyway,
right.
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, don't worry. But it's just interesting because when you have that kind of special relationship that I was never concerned that it's going to be over, it's going to end, whatever. You just let it flow. And of course, there were periods of radio silence, not because of animosity or emotional aspects, simply because we were busy with other things. Life interferes. But we always returned to something that was a creative project, so that we could communicate on top of that, but we still had that fundament. And of course, there were other things. The documentary film later on and early on, it was just like, there was always something going on, and not rushing with these things, but just letting things take their time, basically.
Yeah.
I think that's a key wisdom. You shouldn't be too much of a push and puller. You should just let things bloom. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but it has worked well for me, and I think it did for Jen also.
Good.
Even with a strong work ethic, there was never this kind of push and pull thing where you felt that Jen wanted to rush things. It's better to let the water find its own level and just move along. Be efficient.
Maybe there's a Burroughs do easy thing there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that said, there were many things coming from those guys that were integrated. I think very much so in lifestyle, for good and bad, but also in how you approach creativity. I mean, of course, the cut up being the central spine of it, and that's the thing. Also, how a theoretical approach. Of course, they were practical too, but it's basically a kind of highbrow theoretical approach. But Jen came up with this thing. You can apply it on fucking anything.
Jen operationalized it. Jen put it into practice.
Yes.
It wouldn't have been it would not have been put into practice, not just in the same way, but basically probably would not have been put into practice at all if Jen had not done it and then combined it with Spare and all these other influences. It's just this phenomenal. You use the German word that I'm not going to mangle by trying of a total artwork. I'll let you say the word.
Gesamtkunstwerk.
Yeah, I would not have done that nearly as well. Thank you. But it's such a great concept. German has so many awesome words for things that are good to refer to.
They always look good italicized.
Oh yeah, definitely. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, Burroughs, Jen always had the view. It's like, I am carrying on Burroughs and Geison's work. And Jen, of course, thought Geisen was more interesting than Burroughs. Like loved them both, but thought Geisen was more interesting. And I worked on that. I actually copy edited when I was at Disinfo that book, Nothing is True, Everything is Permitted. You know, that Geisen bio by John Geiger, which is awesome. And his novel, The Process, is awesome. And it's amazing more people don't know it. Geisen is still a completely occult figure, unless you're kind of in this world pretty deep. And I don't even mean the occult world. I mean like kind of within this orbit of ideas. He is such a, like, this guy was from a different universe. It's like you look at some of his paintings and it's like, this is just from a different universe. It's almost like you take in Geisen and his way of living and his art and his approach to magic and life, and it's almost like you feel like you shouldn't be seeing him because he's a renegade from some other universe that shouldn't be here. It's like, no, this breaks the rules. This guy should not be here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think a word that comes up or an adjective is elusive. You know, someone who did his thing. He was also, you know, a disgruntled bitch in a way. Yeah. He had many enemies also.
I wonder how much of that Jen picked up from Geisen.
Possibly, but then again, I don't think necessarily the specifically negative things or the fallout. I think maybe there was emulation in attitude.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
And that could probably lead to negative fallback results. But anyway, absolutely amazing. And that was one of the things that Jen was super, super happy about the book. You know, his name was Master, because those interviews,
awesome.
they were, primitive and poor quality. And I have to say, Andrew Mackenzie did a great job, transcribing and editing that together. And that book is actually coming out in an expanded edition.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Quite soon. It has a piece by, I wrote another chapter or outro about specifically the Anthony Balch films. And then Kathleen Gray wrote about, she was actually the one putting Jen and Geisen together initially. And then also Paul Hampshire, who went with Jen to see Geisen. He also has a little story there. So that will be a good expanded edition.
That's
and
awesome.
I think that will be out in March.
That's awesome. It's funny, isn't it? I'm just thinking as you're saying this, it's like the occult is always occult. And what I mean by that is, you know, I kind of, as I went through learning magic, it's like there's lowercase m magicians and then there's capital M magicians. And when you meet a capital M magician, you know it because they set reality around, like they're like a black hole. You know, it's like or they're just on such a transcendent level. It's like, as you get into this, you get like, okay, like sigils, Crowley, pentagram rituals. And then you come across somebody like Brian Geisen and it's like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is truly otherworldly is the best word I have for it.
Yeah, and I like the word actually transcendental. You know, it takes you to a different mind space. It's simply to be in the vicinity. Yeah. That's magical.
But guys, it's like, you know, like it's I don't know if I would have said previously it frustrates me about the occult world, but I really have no attachment at all to the occult world or Occulture at this point, because it is, I see it sometimes like the kind of museum of magic, like Jen put, where it's like people, you know, you get on like Thelemic Facebook groups or something like that, and they're still arguing over like Crowley paperwork from the 80s or something, or people are just talking about like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, and it's like still like you don't like, no one has come across Brian Geisen. It's like the magicians that are true magicians and truly occult, it seems in a way that they will always be occult. And it's like you can publicize them as much as you want, but it's like it's invisible to people, frustratingly, or maybe for the better.
Absolutely. That's the problem is when most of these people are kind of accultured. They don't really have culture. I remember one of the things where I dropped out of one of those. I'm not going to say which one, but it's a major thelemic group on Facebook, and I posted. I think it was when my documentary about Kenneth Anger was done, and I posted a link to it, and it was moderated, and the moderator asked me relevance question mark. I just left. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. I made a film about Kenneth Anger. Relevance. Well, it's pretty relevant.
It's pretty fucking relevant. That's scary. I mean, it's amazing how fast, particularly as the school systems get increasingly focused on producing drones for a digitized world. Like, all this stuff can be lost. It's so critical to preserve it. Because it's like you even like interact with supposed Thelemites and they don't even know like basic stuff.
Yeah.
So
horrendous.
Very much so. But I think that very much thanks to you and other people and what I did with the Psychic Bible as well. I don't think that will be the case with Jen. And I think that, interestingly enough, Jen seems more relevant now. I feel like the kids coming up now are almost like a Pandrogynous generation in a way. It's like they're like totally in line with what seemed like totally occult ideas in 2002 are now in the news
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, but it's also almost like a worn out cliche in a way where you refer to Jen as a cultural engineer, but it is very true. There are so many things and concepts that Jen just went on and on and on and on about, and it stuck, and it became something. It became like a golemic movement in a way, whether it's like modern primitivism or industrial culture or acid house, whatever, so many things, and then Pandrogyny, of course. And there's a lot of things that can be said for appropriation and misappropriation of these things, but it's nothing that we can control, because once the cat is out of the bag, it will just be meowing forever. And I think that one of the key things that young people won't think about, that's my experience anyway, is the fact that it's not so much based in the gender, merely the gender aspect of it. It was originally a very alchemical idea to create the third, to create a Pandrogyny, and it's not so much about I don't want to be male, I don't want to be female, I want to be both, I want to be, this thing where it's like stripped into an identity core. It was a magical experiment, and that was one of the original, again, impeti or instigations for the project. And that became a problem after Jackie died. And then it became, I think, Jen theorizing about these things when there was no one to ping pong with, either physically or in conversation.
How do you mean became a problem?
Well, I think that the experiment as such stopped because Jen was on as a singular half of a Pandrogyny in a way. But I don't think the project would ever have ended. The Pandrogyny as such would be constantly developing if Jackie had stayed alive, So it's like one half was cut away. And I think that's sort of usually left out of the interpretation of a younger generation who knows Jen's name and the Pandrogyny experiment, and they take that as their own, but thinking of it merely from the point of view of gender aspects and
identification with the body, rather than trying to see it as Jay called it, a cheap suitcase.
See the modifications and the thing being tied into a magical process of refinement and transcendental aspects, instead of, when I see a lot of it, I see lifestyle attributes. Okay. Unfortunately, that's what happens after a while also. It's like with punk, punk becomes modified. And it's all about hair color and making mommy and daddy angry for a bit. But
Well, that said,
it was very.
I think the core idea of breaking sex, I mean, I feel like that's an idea that like that whole generation can get on board with of throwing out gender. You know, that was fucking radical when Jen proposed it, to the point that even like, you know, industrial edgelords were freaked out. And now that is largely a generational ethos almost, I would say, which is amazing how fast that happened.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. But that I think that has to do with exposure, and their technology can be a good thing. You know, ideas take hold faster because of exposure.
I want to ask you some. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that in the olden days, Jen understood this exactly in the same way, and then it was person-to-person interviews. Jen did thousands of interviews, and that's how all these ideas got stuck. It wasn't specifically through the records or record reviews. It was in person-to-person, face-to-face conversations that were published.
What would you say that Jen was most focused on in your final interviews? Because from my perspective, like Jen's big themes towards the end of her life were having things documented in books, and the other was trying to build an intentional community of some form and bring that idea back. And so I'm kind of curious where your conversations went with her.
Yeah, I think those things were there, and I think also when we tied in with loyalty doesn't end with death, that was us again working on something creative. I mean, the book was very creative and the documentary was creative, but that was like an old school kind of thing, and it made us, I think, revisit a lot of the Topi spirit in a way, or Topi psychology, and talking about whether, you know, was it meaningful? What did it mean? Things like that. And there are also, you know, other conversations that weren't taped, but I mean, that's something I remember, and that was important for me, as I think at that phase in my life, I was going through a lot of old stuff. Hence, I did the LaVey project. Hence, I did the Anger project, and hence I did the Jen projects. It was just like going through this beautiful suitcase in a way. But that was one of the key things that I think interested us both, is evaluating the project, the concept, the experiment of Topi. And then we are referring to what we call Topi phase 1. And that's those first 10 years, 81 to 91 approximately, with a bit of aftermath that sort of ended jointly for me and Jen and Tom Banger, who ran the American operation. So we could just, in hindsight, say that, well, time was up. Time must have been up because there was such a sync. Things were going on, and we were all exhausted from, you know, boring administration work and stuff like that. However, we could look at it with pleasure and contentment, you know, saying this was very interesting, an interesting phase 1. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to sort of laugh about sardonically. It's just very, very interesting and very radical. And what was produced, you know, what was gelled is something that the key people and many others have taken on into culture. So it's like the instigations were right there in this little, you know, quasi cult in a way. And then through the process of occulturation, established ideas that were far out then that are not so far out now because of that.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think that was something. And then, of course, you know, memento mori in a way. The could notice that Jen actually got physically weaker and sicker in a way, that brought about those very emotional questions. That's in the end of the book, you know, Jen asking me, what would you, you know, what's the world going to be like for you without me, or something like that, to that effect.
Yeah, that was a poignant question to read in your book.
Yeah. And I thought that, you know, I think I write about in the text in the Source Magic also. I said that, you know, just carry on like you carried on, But in the text where I write about that, I write that that's what in psychoanalysis or psychology is called a rationalization. It means that when you can't deal with things really emotionally, you come up with a good, clear, rational answer.
Yes,
So,
I know it
of
well.
course, it was super sad, but at the same time, I do believe I answered straight-faced and honestly, in that sense that, yeah, that's what that's how I see the world without Jen. I'll just carry on this kind of particular work.
I feel the same. Well, it feels like we probably covered what needed to be covered.
We covered a lot, absolutely. And I think it was very good. And I'm so in favor of this idea, doing a Jen talk and then save the rest for soon.
Yeah. Thank you for having this conversation. It was very, I think, important and healing for
and
me.
The thing is that you and I can talk about these things and share experiences and see what's the same and what's different, etc. And it's highly interesting and rewarding. However, it will be even more so for those who listen.
Absolutely.
Because they don't know sort of our details of the story. So it's interesting.
It needs to be
it'll be a very good show.
It needs to be preserved. The last thing I wanted to ask you is, what do you make of Jen dying right before the world completely went to hell? Like literally like March 2020.
Yeah, I think it's on point, And the thing is, it was such a weird time because me and Vanessa, we were just about to come over, because we had booked Mast, the Mast bookstore in New York, with Jen on March 19th. We're going to have a book launch for Sacred Intent. I had sent books over to them also. And then, there was these more and more reports coming in about COVID and then we said, hey, Jen, maybe we should postpone this a little bit because we don't want Jen to be out and catch the virus, being so frail. And Jen said, well, maybe that's a good idea. And then it didn't matter because the day after we talked about that, possibly making that decision, then the US said, no, this is an isolation. No one can come in. We're banning flights and stuff like that. So that was a done deal, a fait accompli. There was nothing we could do. But it was kind of interesting that we had already sort of canceled the thing, which turned out to be prophetic in a way, because that was a cancellation of that, that's it. And the overarching external things was like a global pandemic. And of course, I don't know exactly what Jen died from. Everyone dies, of course, from the heart stopping. But maybe Jen actually had contracted some COVID thing that just made things worse.
About that.
But it's a moot point. But the thing is that the sync is very. I think it's relevant. We can only speculate, but I think it's just like. Also, again, going out with fireworks in a way. Yeah. Bye-bye. Good luck.
As we're talking about this, I'm remembering, when Topi ended and did change priorities ahead, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, then Topi put out the Green Book or something like that. And one of Jen's last communications to Topi Phase 1 was, I leave you in a fine mess. Am I remembering this correctly? I'm not sure.
I don't know. I have to check that. But it's it's certainly a fine mess that seems to be maybe working out now. We'll see. But anyway, it was very, very
lovely,
chaotic times. Incredibly, and of course, incredibly sad because we knew it was coming. But when it hits you hard.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this opportunity to talk about it. This is a great conversation, and looking forward to our next conversation, hopefully very, very shortly. I will send you another calendar. And
okay, thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you, Carl.
See you soon. Bye.
All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. I definitely had a lot of fun in that conversation. Meet us at magick.me, magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, where you can learn all the skills you need to unleash your true self. I will see you in class, and until next time, hang in there.